Pnawn da, chroeso I Estyn yn fyw arall. I'm Claire Morgan, Strategic Director at Estyn, and I'd like to give you a warm welcome to another Estyn Live. Apologies that we're a few minutes late. We had a couple of technical difficulties, but I think they're sorted now. So today's focus is on the important topic of promoting positive behaviours in secondary schools. So just some housekeeping before we start. Now, part of the webinar will be in Welsh and we have English language interpretation available. To enable this, click on Language and Speech, then choose Language Interpretation and then choose to listen in English. You'll see that at the top of your screen. So let's make a start. So in this session, you're going to hear from Aranwen Morgans-Thomas HMI, who's the author of our recent report, Fostering Mutual Respect, Promoting Positive Behaviours in Secondary School. It highlights the challenges facing secondary schools, but it also includes spotlights of effective practice. We're looking forward to hearing a summary of the report from Aranwen a little later, and we'll also put the link to the full report in the Q&A box on the side of your screen. We're delighted to also be joined by Mike Tate from Cardiff West Community High School and Simon Davis and Mark Bridgens from Ysgol, Gyfun, Gymraeg, Bryn, Tawe. Many thanks for joining us this afternoon, and we're really looking forward to hearing about your work. If you have any questions today, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A box on the side, and we'll try our best to get through as many as possible. So let's make a start, and I'll hand over to Aranwen. Diolch, Aranwen.
Diolch yn fawr, Claire. Pnawn da I chi gyd. Very warm welcome to this session this afternoon. So, as noted by Claire, I'm just going to summarise really the key findings from the thematic report that we published in May of this year on behaviour then. So in terms of the report, it explores the approaches to promoting positive behaviour in secondary schools across Wales. It does highlight the challenges that secondary schools face, and it includes some spotlights of effective practice. Now, the report itself draws on information from visits to 24 secondary and all-age schools, discussions with officers from around 10 local authorities, and findings from a national survey that we put out for head teachers, staff and pupils. In terms of the summary of the findings, without going too much over the challenges which are included in the report, what we found is in the most effective schools that leaders had a clear vision for pupil well-being and established high expectations around behaviour, and as part of this ensured robust self-evaluation work. There was also a firm and secure understanding around working relationships, and this leading to a sense of belonging at school. Communication with parents was clear and regular, and this involved parents being very much involved with behaviour and the policies and procedures around behaviour. Where it was needed, specific provisions for supporting pupils were effective, they were tailored, and they were very much in part of the school's ethos. Transition of pupils, we found, from primary to secondary was strong, or from one school to another, well managed. So there was a secure transformation of information, and that ensured that those transitions were smooth between those different phases. There was thoughtful curriculum planning, and within that we saw that schools were taking on board a careful approach to their curriculum, both in Key Stage 3 and in Key Stage 4, looking at ways in which they could engage pupils in the curriculum and ensuring that that curriculum was suitable for all pupils. Effective teaching. This meant, of course, that staff recognised pupils' individual needs and tailored their planning and their resources according to those needs. There was a well understood and clear policy around mobile phone usage, and this was communicated well, not only to pupils and staff, but also to parents and the wider community. There were regular professional learning opportunities on aspects of behaviour management, and this was done on a regular basis. And lastly, what we found was that the provisions to support behaviour and well-being were carefully planned and managed, and again, regularly self-evaluated. As well as the report, which you can access, and there are a number of spotlights there from different schools that took part in our report, there is also a toolkit that stands alongside the report. The idea behind the toolkit is that it allows schools to reflect on their own practice around promoting positive behaviours, and it takes a step-by-step approach for schools to consider carefully each of the different aspects covered in the report and the questions they may want to ask themselves in moving forward. There is a link also to the toolkit available, and this is of course available on our website for all schools in Welsh and English. And that's it from me in terms of summarising the overview of the report, and I'll hand back over to you now, Claire.
Diolch, Aranwen. So that's a national perspective that we pulled together after doing quite a number of visits to schools and looking at the evidence for our inspection work. But I'm going to hand over to Mike Tate from Cardiff West now to give us that local school perspective, how they have dealt with the challenges of promoting positive behaviour. Diolch, Mike.
Thanks, Claire. Welcome, everybody. Just want to give a quick overview in terms of Cardiff West before we start. So you've got a context, you know, what sort of school we are really. Many of you may know the school. Opened in 2017. We've doubled the numbers of learners, so we're over 1,000 learners now in that time, and we're approaching 70% free school meals. Now, 92% of our learners currently are in the 10% most highest deprived areas in the whole of Wales. During that time as well, CLA learners have multiplied 5 times, and our EAL learners have gone up from 8% to almost 30% in that same time. Now, interestingly, 84% of the current year 7, their reading age is below their chronological age. We also have very low attendance, and what we found as well, when I took over the school a couple of years ago, the exclusion rate was very high. But you know, really, I say that because you know the data suggests that actually Cardiff West is one of the most challenged schools in Wales. However, what we wanted to do as a leadership team was to change that so it wasn't the most challenging school within Wales. So the first thing we had to do was identify the issues, and this was really key. We didn't want to just say, look, behaviour is poor and this is poor. We really dug it deep into the data, and we did a self-evaluation piece, and we identified 4 key areas. We identified internal truancy punctuality. When we saw that, you know, there were many occasions where lateness to class and lateness to school was having an issue. And, you know, we wanted to do something about that. We saw violent incidents and student conflict. And what we saw there were, you know, of the exclusions we had, nearly 40% of all exclusions were linked as a result of fights. And so, you know, when we say that as well, many of our permanent exclusions, 80% of that were also linked to violence and student conflict. Defiance as well, we saw again 55% of all exclusions were linked as a result of defiance. And that was very much that defiance with a member of staff. And linked as well to this, we had antisocial behaviour, swearing, poor corridor behaviour, disrespectful attitudes, and we saw almost 10% of our recording of behaviour files linked with out-of-lesson learning offences. So it was really clear for us that we had to identify those issues first before then being able to put in mitigation around those to reduce those issues within school. So we went on then to look at what the interventions were following the identification of those issues. One of the big things we brought in was a no phone policy. Straight away, we really pushed on a no phone policy, and that really very much led on many of the other things we did. We actually did some building work to stop corridors from being through corridors. We put shutters on toilets. But the big thing we really pushed on was relational practice and professional learning. So with all of our staff, from office staff right the way through, we really pushed on relational practice, how we get on and how we liaise and work with all of our pupils. As well as that, we did restorative justice practices, and we looked at anger management. We brought in the work of youth mentors, and actually we brought in the youth service team and actually have them now within the school at all times. We talked about the use of data earlier, but we use a daily use of data, really forensically sharing that use of behaviour data through class charts with every member of staff within school. So we can start to identify patterns, we can identify hotspots, and we can really start to target those behaviours. I'm sure, like everybody here, we have a graduated response to sanctions, so we build up from the very small right the way through. The wellbeing team meets on a fortnightly basis, using all the data that we have to really target significant concerns. So those pupils that are really causing particular issues, that we can hone in, put appropriate support in place straight away so it doesn't build and become a bigger issue. We move pupils within subject parking. So again, we changed the curriculum here. So for example, all core subjects are taught at the same time. So in year 7, they would all have maths at one time. So we can start to move pupils between sets instead of actually taking pupils out of those subjects. We have music on the changeover so that pupils, in terms of knowing how to get to lessons, pupils then know by the end of the music they need to be in their class. And then we use our learning ethos officers to zone hotspots. So we identify through data where particular issues are, when during the week or the day they occur, and actually allocate members of staff so that we're supervising those areas. We also brought in a reset, so that a reset now is where pupils, particularly around defiance, have an opportunity off-site with one of our primary schools to do some relational work, to do some restorative work rather than exclusion. And we found there's some really improved behaviours on the back of that. So we put an awful lot of interventions in place very quickly once we'd identified what the particular issues were. Now, if we move on to outcomes, and again, I'm going over this very quickly, but we saw some very quick, some very positive outcomes over the last year. Our fights and violent incidents have reduced by 71%. Significant behaviour referrals, those on class charts, C4s and C5 levels, have reduced by over 47%. And at the same time, the positive to negative referral ratio increased. So consistently now on a week-by-week basis, our positive ratios are above 94 and 95%. We saw a 50% reduction in lateness to lessons, and linked with that, because pupils were getting lessons on time, out of lesson behaviour logs were reduced by 53%. And what was really pleasing to see was the 60% reduction in all exclusions. And this continues to fall month on month. So really important. Big part, as I said, was all about the mobile phone piece, reducing that defiance straight away. And what we saw then, linked in with the exclusions, was a 72% reduction in exclusions as a result of sustained defiance. Now, in a school like ours, you might think, well, it's really difficult to implement. It was all about consistent approaches, and we really focused on that on a daily basis. You know, we saw an average phone confiscation of maybe around 6 per day, and again, that is falling. Our attendance as a byproduct has increased by 2.7%, and we're now at a point where our attendance is the highest since the return from the pandemic. And actually linked to all of this, visitors to school really notice a change in ethos and a change in climate in the school, where it's calm, it's very quiet around the school. And I think linked to that, we've seen a huge reduction in teacher sickness by over 75%. So that's the findings, very short looking at those. Where do we go from here? Well, actually, what we've now got to a stage is that we can actually start focusing on really improving teaching and learning and that engagement. because the conditions are now right for that to happen. And actually what we've also focused on this term is something we call manners matter. So we're really pushing on that because we believe the conditions are now right. This is simple things like please, thank yous, holding doors open, excuse me, pardon, just those small basic things that really change the interaction between staff and pupils. And of course, throughout all of this, what we're asking our staff to do is model those behaviours. So in a very short space of time, because we identified the real issues around behaviour, rather than just saying behaviour was poor, we were able to dig deep into those and put specific interventions in place around those key areas. And because of that, and because of the consistency and hard work of the staff, what we've also seen a very quickly sustained improvement in outcomes. Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, Mike, that was really interesting there, and looking at the impact of the strategies, it looks quite impressive. I think on one of the slides there was mention of reset zoned hotspots. I wonder if you could tell us briefly about those and particularly the impact of those particular strategies.
Yeah, well, reset was very much based around our relational practice, so that pupils got the opportunity to really understand why they were behaving in that way. So with trained staff in one of our feeder schools, they would then work with those staff to look at relational practice, to understand their behaviours, to put some restorative approaches in place. And then actually in the afternoon, as a way of really boosting their confidence, they would actually then work with our primary age pupils. Now, whether that be, refereeing a football match or doing some reading with them. And what we found with those pupils that were referred for reset, only 16% of those pupils actually went on and re-offended in terms of those behaviours afterwards. So a real impact in terms of reset. Zoned hotspots, I'm sure a lot of people are doing this, is identifying through the use of the class charts data where the issues were, what days were they, was it a particular subject, was it a particular area, so that actually we would have more staff in those areas to support members of staff. So very soon, that high presence around the building of support staff was really noticed by the pupils.
Great. Diolch, Mike.
Diolch.
Okay, you're probably looking at the clock. It's a good time to move on to our second input. So Simon and Mark from Bryn Tawe, I'll hand over to you.
Diolch, Claire, a prynawn da bawb. A diolch am y cyfle i ddod i rhannu'r ein profiadau ni gyda chi brynhawn yma. Os gallwn ni ymlaen if you go on to the next slide. Just o ran, mae cyd-destun Bryn Tawe yn wahanol iawn falle i'r cyd-destun chi wedi clywed gan Mike fyna. Mae tua 880 o ddysgwyr dyn ni mewn ffigurau prydysgol am ddim ac anghenion dysgu yn is yn y cyfartaleddau Cymru. Ond falle un ffactor eto fel yng Nghaerdydd, ysgol yn gwasanaethu plant y ddinas a ardal dwyreiniol y ddinas. Mae tipyn o ddifreintiededd o gwmpas yr ardaloedd mae'n disgyblion ni yn byw felly. Os gallwn ni, if we can go on to the next slide, fi'n credu un peth sydd wedi bod yn nodweddiadol am y gwaith i ni wedi trio wneud fan hyn yw bod cefnogi lles wedi bod yn esblygiad, dwi ddim jyst yn rhywbeth i ni wedi dechrau yn union syth yn y blynyddoedd diwethaf ers Covid. Mae wedi bod yn flaenoriaeth ac ar waith ni ers tipyn o amser felly. Thyn ni gyflwyno arferion adferol i'r ysgol yn 2012 ac o'r pwynt yna mae'r ffocws ar berthnasau wedi bod yn gryf iawn oherwydd mae'n allweddol bwysig i gael disgyblion i ddysgu. Mae disgyblion hapus yn disgyblion sy'n dysgu. Hwna'n un o'r mantras sydd gyda ni fan hyn. Wnaeth ni ddatblygu uned gwella lle oedd cyfle i ddysgwyr i fynd i gael cefnogaeth am bresnoldeb, ymddygiad, amrywiol bethau. A un peth felly nodweddiadol oedd newid yn polisi ymddygiad i bolisi perthnasau ac ymddygiad, a nid jyst yn y teitl, ond yn y cynnwys lot fwy o ffocws ar feithrin perthnasau iachus gyda disgyblion, ac os ni yn gweld pa mae'r berthynas rhwng yr athrawon a'r dysgwyr yn gryf, mae'r dysgwyr yn perfformio'n well mewn nifer fawr o ffyrdd yn yr ysgol. Ond ni'n awyddus iawn bod cefnogaeth gan bob dysgwr, a wnaethon ni gyflwyno jyst cyn Covid i ddweud y gwir, y syniad yma o dysgwyr yn enwebu oedolyn gofalgar, rhywun o'n ni'n gwybod o'n nhw wedi dewis fel oedolyn ar y staff bydden nhw'n gallu troi ato os oedd problem. A mae hwn wedi dod â lot o wybodaeth i ni am ddysgwyr a wedyn yn gallu bod yn rhagweithiol ar gyfer cefnogi amrywiol ddysgwyr am amrywiol resymau wrth gwrs. Fel mewn bob ysgol fi'n siŵr ni wedi gweld yr angen i addasu'n cwricwlwm ni fel bod hwnna'n teilwra gofynion pob dysgwr, a ni wedi dod â lot fwy o gyrsiau galwedigaethol, a ni hefyd wedi trio bod yn greadigol gyda beth ni'n wneud gyda unigolion lle maen nhw'n cael profiadau gwaith gwahanol yn yr ysgol, a thi hwnt, da ni wedi gweld gwelliant mewn agweddau ddysgu wrth deilwra cwricwlwm bron ar lefel unigol i ddysgwyr lle mae hwnna'n bosib. Ar ddechrau, eleni, wnaethon ni ail-gyflwyno neu gyflwyno strategaeth ABC Bryn Tawe yn sôn am agwedd, barod a chefnogaeth i ddysgu, a mae hwnna'n rhywbeth sydd ar waith gyda ni, ni'n barod yn gweld gwelliannau mewn agweddau ddysgu, ond ni hefyd yn gwybod mae hwn nid yn, ond mae fe'n broses barhaus o ran ceisio cefnogi dysgwyr i wella arferion, a mae hwnna'n gallu bod yn heriol ar y degau. Beth sydd wedi dod yn amlwg i ni, fi'n meddwl, dros amser, yw bod angen adnodd neu adnoddau penodol i gefnogi beth i ni wedi gweld y cynnydd yn yr anghenion yma, ac yn enwedig yn y 5 mlynedd diwethaf, ni wedi gweld cynnydd sylweddol yn y nifer o ddysgwyr sydd yn cyflwyno anawsterau dysgu o ran ymddygiad a hefyd anawsterau emosiynol. A mae hwnna i gyd yn gallu cael effaith sylweddol ar eu dysgu nhw yn y dosbarth. Felly mae Mark yn mynd i fy mlaen i gyflwyno i drafod ychydig o'r adnoddau sydd gyda ni i gefnogi dysgwyr.
Diolch. Sawl blwyddyn nôl, o'n i wedi sefydlu stafell, sa'n mynd i cyfeirio ato uned gwella, a be welon ni oedd angen addasu hwnna, a wrth werthuso yn gwaith, ni wedi sylweddoli bod angen 2 stafell gwahanol, sef yr Hafan a'r stafell Perthyn. So, yr stafell Perthyn yw'r stafell lle mae disgyblion yn gallu mynd i reoleiddio, i wella eu ymddygiad, i siarad gyda aelod o staff os oes angen. Weithiau ni'n galw nhw, a mae yna amserlen, mae yna cynllun yn ei le, a weithiau maen nhw'n gallu galw mewn eu hunan petai nhw'n teimlo bod angen y cefnogaeth ychwanegol yna. Ni'n ceisio roi raglen mentora ymddygiad mewn, ble ni'n rhoi pethau penodol yn le, aelod staff penodol i gefnogi disgyblion i helpu nhw gyda'i ymddygiad o ddydd i ddydd. Mae'n lle maen nhw'n gallu mynd i reoleiddio, os maen nhw'n cael diwrnod gwael, os maen nhw'n dod mewn i'r ysgol yn y bore, mewn hwyliau gwael, maen nhw'n mynd i gael lle paned y de, darn o dost i reoleiddio cyn dechrau'r dydd, neu maen nhw'n gallu mynd yn ystod y dydd. Fel wedi Simon am arferion adferol, a ni'n gwneud lot o waith adferol yna yn dilyn digwyddiadau, ceisio datrys problemau, datrys perthnasoedd, a gwella pethau cyn fod yn mynd nôl i wersi neu nôl o gwmpas yr ysgol. Petai dysgwyr yn cael gwaharddiad o'r ysgol, ni wedi rhoi polisi yn ei le ble maen nhw'n dod nôl mewn i'r ysgol i ail-integreiddio a i ni wirio bod nhw'n iawn, bod nhw'n y lle iawn, meddylfryd iawn, bod y problemau wedi datrys cyn maen nhw'n dechrau nôl mewn gwersi, felly maen nhw'n digwydd fyna. A hefyd, fel wedys i, yn lle galw mewn, mae'r oedolyn gofalgar yn aml iawn yna, a maen nhw'n gallu galw mewn petai unrhyw problemau. Maen nhw'n teimlo'n ddiogel yn yr ysgol, maen nhw'n gwybod bod rhywun a lle gyda nhw i fynd petai problem neu petai angen am hwnna. Yr un nesaf, mi'n sôn am yw'r Hafan, yr ystafell Hafan, so mae hwnna bach yn wahanol. Mae'n lle mwy penodol tuag at iechyd meddwl ac anghenion emosiynol. Mae'n lle fwy tawel, mae'n lle llynyddu ar gyfer disgyblion bregus, ar gyfer disgyblion sydd a falle problemau gorbryder ac ati. Mae staff wedi hyfforddi fyna gyda, wedi wneud y cyrsau, wedi cael y sgiliau iawn i helpu'r disgyblion yna. Mae'n lle croesawgar, mae'n tawel, mae yna gegin bach yna, mae yna beanbags, mae yna soffa bach neis, mae yna cerddoriaeth mlaen, a mae yna wyrgylch gwahanol iawn yna. Mae yna stafell synhwyrau wedi cysylltu'r stafell hefyd. Petai disgyblion bregus yn cael trafferth, maen nhw'n gallu mynd fyna, maen nhw'n teimlo'n ddiogel. Ni'n defnyddio fe ar gyfer ail-integreiddio a gwella presenoldeb ni. Disgyblion sydd wedi bod off ysgol am gyfnod yn wedig o ran problemau gorbryder ni'n ail-integru iddyn nhw trwy'r stafell yma, trwy'r staff sydd yn yr ystafell yma. Mae'n canolfan ar gyfer sesiynau ELSA ni, i gefnogi emosiynau pobl, ac hefyd yn ganolfan ar gyfer asiantaethau allanol. So mae pobl fel Cams in Reach, yr Hwb Help Cynnar, ac ati yn gweithio o'r ystafell yna. So mae un canolfan, un stafell a canolbwynt gyda nhw. A mae hefyd mae'n gweithio'r cynnydd ni a profiad gwaith a gweithgareddau allgyrsiol. Ni'n rhedeg raglen garddio, dyddiol ac ati mae reina gyd yn gweithio o'r ystafell yma. Mae'r dysgwyr yn hoffi'r ddwy lle. Maen nhw wedi sôn am eu profiadau nhw a pryd chi'n siarad nhw, maen nhw'n gweld e fel lleoliadau pwysig iawn iddyn nhw. Mae rhaid i dweud bod nhw'n ond yn dod i'r ysgol oherwydd maen nhw'n gwybod bod lle i fynd a bod pobl gyda nhw, maen nhw'n gallu troi ato. Maen nhw'n teimlo bod yr hafan yn enwedig yn lleihau straen. Mi'n dweud mae'n lleihau straen nhw'n teimlo oherwydd nhw'n gwybod gallaf mynd yna i wneud gwaith. Maen nhw'n teimlo'n ddiogel a petai issues, mae yna lle gyda nhw. Yn sall perthyn, mae rhaid i dweud bod yn lle dda i gael cymorth a jyst i siarad am problemau, a mae'n dda oherwydd dwi'n gallu tywelu a siarad gyda athro petai angen a petai problem. Un o'r prif pethau ni wedi sylweddoli arno yw mae'r lleoliadau yma'n wych a mae'r dysgwyr yn hoffi nhw'n fawr, ond mae rhaid cael y pobl iawn yn y lle iawn. Felly ni wedi i'w sgilio'n staff ni, maen nhw wedi bod ar gyrsiau, ni'n gweithio gyda nhw yn gyson, a jyst gael y pobl iawn yn y lle iawn. Mae'r bobl sy'n yna sy'n gweithio yna nawr yn arbennig o dda, mae'r dysgwyr yn hoffi nhw, a mae hwnna bendant yn ei gwahaniaeth mawr, jyst gael y natur, y personoliaeth iawn a'r sgiliau iawn. Mae perthnasoedd yn holl bwysig yn yr ysgol, yn enwedig yn y sefyllfaoedd yma, a fe chi'n gweld os mae'r dysgwyr yn hoffi'r staff sydd yna, maen nhw'n fwy tebygol o troi ato nhw a mae pethau'n gweithio lot yn well. Fel wedais i, maen nhw wedi cael hyfforddiant ELSA, maen nhw wedi cael yr hyfforddiant trauma, gwybodaeth am trauma, a mae pethau yna bendant yn helpu. Sa'n mynd i sôn ar yr effaith ar y ddwy.
Mae'r effaith yn glir o ran ymateb ac agwedd nifer fawr o ddysgwyr. Wedig criw ddysgwyr felly mwy bregus, maen nhw nawr yn gallu manteisio ar ddarpariaeth sydd yn benodol iddyn nhw. Heb os mae fwy o ddysgwyr yn teimlo perthyn i Bryn Tawe, a mae hwnna'n bwysig iawn i ni'n rhoi lot o ffocws ar berthnasau. A mae yna ystadegau eleni o ran agwedd ar ddysgu, mae yna welliannau clir wedi dod fyna. Pethau eraill, mae yna leihad mewn ail-waharddiadau gan ddisgyblion oherwydd y dull o ail-integreiddio. A beth sy'n ddiddorol yw mae'r oedolion gofalgar, mae nifer fawr o ddysgwyr nawr yn dewis staff yr unedau yma fel yr oedolyn maen nhw'n gallu troi atyn nhw. Felly, ni wedi gweithio i fireinio'r ddarpariaeth yma, a mae fe'n gweithio fel mae fe ar hyn o bryd i ni, ond ni'n gwybod bod yna waith i'r dyfodol mwyn symud ymlaen hefyd. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr iawn Simon a Mark am roi darlun cynhwysfawr iawn i ni o yr hyn i chi wedi wneud wrth gwrs i weithio tuag at yr agweddau positif mewn ymddygiadau disgyblion. Un peth sy'n amlygu fyna wrth gwrs, a fi'n siŵr falle sydd yn wneud i lawer o bobl i feddwl, beth felly chi'n meddwl yw'r camau nesaf nawr wrth edrych ar hyn, achos yn amlwg chi'n gwerthuso'ch gwaith yn gyson, ac mae'n dangos bod chi wedi bod ar daith mewn gwirionedd ers cryn amser nawr yn esblygu ac yn datblygu rhain. So beth i chi'n gweld fel ysgol efallai yw'ch camau nesaf chi?
Mae gyd yn byti, ni moyn grymuso arferion dyddiol, mae hwnna'n bwysig iawn i ni, so ni yn y broses o barhau i wella'r defnydd o'r stafell fel maen nhw'n sefyll nawr. Heb os mae eisiau fforddiant pellach, ni'n gweld hynny mwy a mwy gyda staff sy'n cynorthwyo a cael y fforddiant penodol, mwy o staff wedi fforddi ar gyfer gallu cefnogi'r dysgwyr yma. I ni wedi dechrau ar y broses o ehangu'r ddarpariaeth. Mae fe'n grêt i gael fwy o staff mewn yna. O ran gweithwyr lles eto, so ni wedi apwyntio swyddog ymgysylltu teuluol sy'n hen rôl mewn nifer o ysgolion. Mae hwnna'n rôl newydd i ni. Ni'n barod yn gweld gwahaniaeth yn ymgysylltu gyda theuluoedd. A fi'n credu wrth bod ni'n symud a bod twf yn yr ysgol adeilad newydd, ni'n edrych ar uned gynhwysiant ehangach lle ni'n gallu lleoli'r yr holl ystafelloedd yma yn yr un ardal a wedyn defnyddio nhw felly'n fwy hwylus bod bobl yn gallu pigo mewn y mas o lefydd gwahanol gydag athrawon hefyd yna neu athro yna mwyn ffocysu ar fedre. Mae hwnna'n rhywbeth weithiau sy'n cael ei golli, so mae hwnna'n ffocws mawr i'n neud yn siŵr bod medre dysgwyr dal yn ffocws yn yr ystafelloedd cefnogol yma.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, mae hwnna'n ddefnyddiol iawn, fi'n siŵr i nifer o rhai sydd gyda ni'n gwrando pnawn yma, so felly diolch yn fawr iawn i chi. Ac felly ar y nodyn, on that note, before I hand over to you, Claire, I think both the providers that we've had this afternoon, would be more than willing for you to go along and visit their provisions and see the work that they've done. I've certainly been to both the schools, and it is really well worth you seeing it as it is working from day to day. So diolch yn fawr iawn i'r ddau ohonoch chi.
Diolch. We've run out of time this afternoon. I'm sure that there would be lots of questions if we had a little bit more time, but special thanks to Mike, Simon and Mark and Aranwen for their inputs, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. If you have any questions about anything you've heard this afternoon, please don't hesitate to contact us. Best email address is communications@estyn.gov.wales, and we'll get back to you. But you can also use that same email address if you want to give us some feedback on the Estyn live model that we've been using as well, and that feedback would be very welcome indeed. So on behalf of everyone here at Estyn, thank you for joining us and have a lovely evening. Hwyl fawr.